So imagine writing, recording, and then releasing a brand new album every 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and doing that for 7 years straight.
That is just, I mean, that's relentless.
Right. Now imagine doing all that while, sleeping on a different stranger's floor across America, like almost every single night.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't doing it for fame. You certainly aren't doing it for money. You're just doing it because if you stop, the entire machine you've built with your own 2 hands completely falls apart.
Yeah, it is a staggering level of output. And, it requires a kind of psychological endurance that, frankly, most people simply don't possess.
Exactly.
Because when you look at the economics and just the sheer physical toll of that lifestyle, it's a miracle anyone survives it, let alone, thrives creatively within it.
Absolutely. So welcome to today's deep dive. Today we are unpacking the fascinating, relentless, and ultimately really turbulent life cycle of a true indie rock workhorse.
Yeah.
We're looking at the American indie rock band, kind of like spitting. And we're using them as a lens to really understand the raw reality of underground music.
It's a perfect case study for that, honestly.
It really is. We're drawing all our info today from the band's Wikipedia page, which covers a story that spans roughly 3 decades. And the mission for you, the listener, today is this. Even if you have never heard a single note of their music, we want to look at how the sheer volume of their output and, the dramatic arc of their career makes this an incredible study of just extreme creative drive.
Right, because this isn't just a biography of one band. It's really a blueprint of an entire era of independent music.
Yeah.
It shows us exactly how art was made, how it was distributed, and how it was consumed before the streaming age just, completely rewrote all the rules.
Right, before Spotify and Apple Music changed everything.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. The story starts in 1996 in Portland, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
The band forms, but the driving force, like the singer-songwriter at the absolute center of it all, is Ben Barnett.
Yeah, Barnett is the core.
And right away, the comparisons being thrown at Barnett by critics are, they're incredibly lofty.
Oh, for sure.
He's being mentioned in the same breath
Uh-huh.
as some legendary songwriters. We're talking Elliott Smith, Mark Eitzel, Billy Bragg, and Robert Pollard.
See, that specific combination of names tells you almost everything you need to know about what this music sounds like.
How so?
Well, you have the fragile, really confessional intimacy of an Elliott Smith.
Right.
You mix that with the sort of working class, heavily political folk punk edge of someone like Billy Bragg.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add the prolific, almost manic indie weirdness of a Robert Pollard from Guided by Voices.
That is quite a mix.
It is. It paints a picture of an artist who is, on one hand, deeply invested in the craft of songwriting, but who is also, just channeling this massive amount of complex, completely unfiltered emotion directly into the microphone.
Yeah, but making the art is really only half the battle here, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because the real story is how that art was delivered to the world. Between 1996 and 2006, kind of like spitting, released 12 albums.
Yeah.
In just 7 years, 12 albums.
And that number, honestly, it doesn't even account for the reality of their day-to-day existence during that time.
Right, because they were touring.
Constantly. They were constantly touring the U.S. Sometimes Barnett would be out there with a full backing band, and other times he'd strip it all down and just tour alongside David Jerpovich.
Oh, from Novi Split, right.
Exactly, from Novi Split. And they were literally living in vans. They were playing basement shows, tiny clubs, basically anywhere that would open their doors to them.
Okay, let me try to put this into perspective for you, the listener, because releasing 12 albums in 7 years is just mind-boggling.
It really is.
It's like a novelist churning out 2 complete published books every single year, but doing it while constantly traveling the country and sleeping on floors.
Yeah, it's exhausting just thinking about it.
So I have to ask, how does an artist maintain any sort of quality control when they are essentially operating as a fire hose of music? Like, does this level of output suggest this desperate, burning need to communicate? Or is it just a reflection of an era where indie bands had to release constantly just to survive financially?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it's a collision of both.
Okay.
The compulsion to create is obviously there. You don't write that much if you don't have something to say. But the mechanics of the 90s and early 2000s indie scene absolutely demanded this kind of hustle.
Because there was no internet, really. Not for music distribution, anyway.
Right. You have to remember, without the massive marketing budgets of major labels, bands survived purely on momentum. You didn't have algorithms pushing your music to new listeners while you slept. You stayed relevant by constantly touring, and you financed that touring by constantly having something brand new at the merch table to sell to the kids who showed up.
It's almost like running a grassroots political campaign.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't buying national television airtime.
Yeah.
You were literally out there shaking hands, playing in someone's living room, and selling cassette tapes one by one to build a local base.
Precisely. And that grassroots nature is entirely reflected in the wild patchwork of their discography.
Yeah, the labels are all over the place.
Right. They didn't just sign to one label and stay put. They hopped between a variety of really cool independent labels. You had Jealous Butcher, Hush Records, New American Dream, Barsuck.
All the classic indie labels.
Exactly. And get this. In the year 2000 alone, they released a full-length album called You Secretly Want Me Dead, and then turned around in that same year and released another one called Nothing Makes Sense Without It.
2 full lengths in 1 year.
Yes.
And it wasn't just traditional studio albums on CDs either. The sources list an overwhelming array of other formats.
Yeah.
They were heavily releasing cassettes.
Yeah.
They were putting out live albums recorded at places like the Electric Factory and the Fireside Bowl.
Which I should add, those venues are incredibly culturally significant.
Oh, totally. The Electric Factory in Philly was a major proving ground.
Yeah, and the Fireside Bowl in Chicago, if you don't know, it was a literal bowling alley that served as basically the absolute mecca for DIY punk and indie bands in the 90s.
Right.
Recording live albums, there wasn't just about capturing a performance, it was about planting a flag in the cultural soil of the underground.
They were also constantly releasing what are called split records with bands like City on Film and Rosa Shamus.
Yeah, splits were huge.
So for anyone listening who is unfamiliar with the term, what exactly is the strategic value of a split record? Why not just release your own songs?
Well, a split record, which is usually a 7-inch vinyl where one band takes side A and another takes side B, it was the ultimate survival mechanism of the underground.
Because of the cost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pressing vinyl is incredibly expensive, so if you split the cost with another band, you immediately have your financial risk.
That makes sense.
But more importantly, you cross-pollinate your audiences. If, say, City on Film fans buy the record for their song, they are literally forced to flip it over eventually and listen to kind of like spitting.
Right, they can't avoid it.
Exactly. It was a brilliant, highly communal way to hack the system and grow a fan base before the internet made sharing music frictionless.
Okay, so they are hacking the system, they are relentlessly touring, pressing splits, and building this massive wall of creative effort. And eventually, that hustle actually catches the attention of the gatekeepers.
It does.
Because in 1999, they released a 7-inch single called Birds of a Feather, and it gets picked up in the UK by the legendary BBC Radio 1 DJ, John Peel.
Which is, I mean, that is the holy grail of critical validation for an indie band.
Huge.
John Peel was arguably the most important tastemaker in alternative music globally. Having him play your record on the BBC signaled to the hardcore music fans, the journalists, the record store clerks, that you were the real deal.
But here is where the reality of the music business completely shatters the fairy tale we've all been sold.
Yeah.
Because the text explicitly notes that despite this massive cosign from John Peel, the track never received regular airplay.
Right.
And wait, we always hear the Hollywood version, where a famous DJ plays a song and a band explodes into superstardom overnight. So why is the reality of the indie grind so different? How is it that John Peel, the biggest tastemaker in the UK, plays their track and they just go right back to sleeping on floors in a tour van?
Because, unfortunately, critical cachet does not equal commercial capital. Tastemakers like John Peel can validate your art, but regular, sustained airplay, like the kind that gets a song stuck in the heads of millions of people and actually translates into a lucrative career, that requires a massive, expensive machinery.
It takes money.
It takes a ton of money. It requires radio promoters who actively lobby stations. It requires high-powered publicists. It requires hundreds of thousands of dollars that a band operating on independent labels like Hush or Jealous Butcher simply does not have access to.
So you get the critical applause, you get the prestige of the BBC, but you don't actually get the paycheck.
Exactly.
You still have to pack up your gear, drive the van 12 hours to the next gig, and just hope you sell enough T-shirts to buy gas.
And that is the exact psychological friction that breaks bands.
Yeah.
You know your art is good enough to be recognized by the best in the world, but your physical reality is still exhausting, unglamorous, and extremely financially precarious. That gap takes a massive toll on a human being.
which leads us right into the first major turning point of this timeline. Because in 2006, after a decade of this relentless, fire hose-level pace, 12 albums, and endless miles on the road, the band announces a breakup.
Yeah.
And the official reason given is simply personal reasons. They hit the indie ceiling and the machine shuts down.
Which is understandable. When you burn the candle at both ends for that long, burnout isn't just a possibility. It's an absolute guarantee. You have to step away, or it destroys you.
But what happens when an artist walks away from the project that defined a decade of their life?
Well, the creative drive doesn't just vanish into thin air.
Right. And Barnett stays deeply embedded in the music world. Our sources note he actually had a stint playing in another prominent indie band, the Thermals, 2002 2003, which overlapped with his own band. And after kind of like spitting ends, he fronts a new band called Blunt Mechanic, which releases an album called World Record in 2010.
So he's still creating, but he's shifting the context.
Yeah.
He's exploring different collaborative dynamics, stepping out of the immense pressure cooker of being the sole visionary for a project that demands an album every 6 months.
He also takes on a completely different role. Starting in 2007, Barnett shifts to teaching music at the Paul Green School of Rock in Seattle.
Yeah, that's a big shift.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's almost like a veteran wizard passing down spells to the next generation. You know,
I love that analogy.
you take all that hard-won knowledge, the songwriting, the performance, the literal survival skills of the 90s indie scene, and you channel it into education.
It's a profound shift in utility. But there is also a very real psychological phenomenon that happens when professional musicians start teaching.
Oh, Wes?
Well, when you are forced to break music down to its absolute fundamentals for a young student, like teaching them their first chords or analyzing why a melody works, it strips away all the industry baggage. It removes the stress of record labels and touring logistics, and it reconnects you with the raw, visceral enthusiasm of discovery.
It basically reminds you why you picked up a guitar in the first place.
Exactly. And inevitably, that process often rekindles the desire to perform the very songs that defined your own youth. You start to miss the specific emotional resonance of your primary catalog.
Which perfectly explains what happens next, because in 2014, kind of like Spitting returns,
They do?
they reunite as a trio, bringing in Brian Grant on bass and Dante Johnson on drums. They record a brand new debut for Top Shelf Records called It's Always Nice to See You, and they head out on a tour with the band Lemuria. And then jumping ahead even further in the sources, on November 8, 2024, they release a 3-song EP called Soon via Near Mint Records, which is explicitly noted as their first official release in a decade.
Yeah, another long gap.
So my question is, what pulls a musician back to their original moniker after a decade away? Why return to the name kind of like Spitting in 2014 and then again in 2024 instead of just starting fresh?
Because of the enduring gravity of the catalog,
Okay.
when you pour that much of your soul into a specific project and you release that much volume under one name, it becomes inextricably linked to your identity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The name holds the history. It holds the connection to the audience who grew up listening to those 12 albums. Starting fresh under a new name means abandoning the equity of that shared history.
And it's clear they were deeply obsessed with history in general, honestly, not just their own. During this entire run, their discography is peppered with wildly eclectic side projects.
Oh, yeah, the covers.
Yeah. They cover the 60s protest folk of Phil Ochs. They do a tribute album to the Carl Hendricks Trio. They contribute to compilations covering Motown, Bjork, and Led Zeppelin.
It shows an artist in constant active conversation with the music that shaped them. They aren't creating in a vacuum. By engaging with Phil Ochs and Bjork, they are bridging genres and eras, essentially proving that good songwriting transcends the boundaries of just quote-unquote indie rock.
It really feels like a triumphant narrative arc. The exhausted workhorse steps away, rediscovers the joy of music through teaching, and returns to secure their legacy.
It does.
But then we arrive at the year 2025, and the narrative takes a sudden, incredibly sharp, and very complicated turn.
It does. And it's important to note here for our listeners that we are looking strictly at the historical record provided in the sources.
Yes, absolutely.
We aren't here to litigate or take sides in any way. We are just reporting what's there. But the timeline shows a definitive and abrupt halt.
Right. So, according to the source text, on September 17th, 2025, following allegations of grooming and sexual assault made by the vocalist of a band called February, a statement was released announcing the end of kind of like Spitting.
The documentation also notes that Ben Barnett later issued a statement explicitly denying the allegations against him. However, the operational result was absolute. Barnett announced the immediate end of the band.
And the timeline notes one final detail. Shortly after the announcement of the band's end, their final album, which was titled I Do It For My City, was released posthumously on October 3, 2025.
Releasing an album mere weeks after a band disbands under the cloud of serious controversy creates an incredibly dense cultural artifact.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It places a massive weight on the music, fundamentally altering how it will be received and analyzed by the public.
So what does this all mean? How do you, as a music fan listening right now, process a situation like this? How do you grapple with the reality where a 30-year catalog of deeply emotional, prolific art is suddenly brought to a halt by such serious allegations?
This raises an important question, really. It's the defining tension of modern fandom.
Yeah.
Audiences are constantly forced to navigate the abrupt collision between an artist's personal controversies and their public body of work. For decades, listeners engaged with these songs. They projected their own heartbreak, their joy, and their identity onto the lyrics.
Right, the music becomes part of their own life story.
Exactly. And then an event occurs that permanently alters the context of that relationship. The legacy doesn't disappear, but it becomes permanently complicated. It's fractured. It forces every individual listener to decide how, or even if, they can separate the deeply personal connection they have to the art from the realities surrounding the artist.
It retroactively changes the shape of the entire timeline we've been mapping out today.
It really does.
You can't look at the 1996 formation in Portland, or the superhuman output of 12 albums, or the John Peel cosign without looking through the lens of that final 2025 bullet point. The history is essentially rewritten in the mind of the audience.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the story of kind of like spitting acts as a profound microcosm of the independent music world as a whole. It encompasses the entire spectrum. It shows the relentless, burning drive to create at all costs. It highlights the unglamorous, exhausting reality of the working-class musician who survives on split 7 inches and tour van floors.
Yeah.
It shows the triumph of returning to your art, and ultimately, it shows the messy, deeply human flaws that can tear a 3-decade legacy down in an instant.
It is the complete spectrum of the underground experience, all contained within the margins of one sprawling Wikipedia page. We've looked at a discography filled with dozens of splits, live acoustic sessions, and tribute albums. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of hours of human connection pressed into vinyl and wound into cassette tapes.
Yeah, so much history.
Sweat on the stages of the Electric Factory and the Fireside Bowl. 30 years of a life lived at maximum volume.
And yet, when that history is formalized, when the life's work of an artist is codified onto a digital encyclopedia, the formatting fundamentally changes how we perceive it.
Exactly. It takes 3 decades of loud, chaotic, relentless emotion and flattens it into dry bullet points, culminating in a final controversial end, which leaves us with a lingering thought for you to mull over today. Look at that discography. Look at the thousands of hours of connection. When you look at the internet's sterile, factual record of an artist's controversial end, does that digital permanence inevitably erase the lived human experience of the art itself? Or can the messy, complicated reality of the music and the cold, hard bullet points somehow exist in the exact same space?